The rain pounded against the windshield as I pulled into the parking lot of the dilapidated motel. The neon sign above the office flickered intermittently, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt. It was late, and I was tired from hours of driving through the desolate countryside. I just needed a place to rest for the night, and this was the only option for miles. As I approached the motel office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The building looked as though it had seen better days, its paint peeling and its windows covered in a thick layer of grime. A flickering vacancy sign hung in the window, its letters missing here and there, making it hard to read at first glare. I stepped inside, a bell above the door jingling softly. The interior was dimly lit, and the air was heavy with the musty scent of old carpet and cigarette smoke. A bored-looking clerk sat behind the counter, her eyes glued to a small television that played a rerun of some late-night talk show. "Can I help you?" she mumbled without looking up. "I need a room for the night," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She finally looked up, her eyes cold and distant. "We got rooms," she said, her voice devoid of enthusiasm. "How many nights?" "Just one," I said quickly, eager to be out of there. She handed me a tarnished key attached to a plastic fob with a faded room number, 13. "That'll be $50, she said, her tone as dull as ever. I handed her the cash and she counted it slowly, her long, nicotine-stained fingers moving methodically. Finally satisfied, she handed me a worn-out receipt and a rusty key. "Room 13 is at the end of the building," she said, her gaze returning to the television. I grabbed the key and made my way down a dimly lit corridor, the carpet underfoot squishing with each step. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The motel was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of the rain outside and the low drone of the television from the office. When I reached room 13, I hesitated for a moment before inserting the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was stifling, and I quickly opened a window to let in some fresh air. The room was sparsely furnished with a sagging double bed, a rickety nightstand, and a flickering overhead light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. As I settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination playing tricks on me, but the sensation persisted. I glanced out the window and saw nothing but darkness and rain. It was just my tired mind, I told myself, playing tricks on me after a long day on the road. I decided to take a shower to relax and wash away the grime of the day. The bathroom was equally dismal, with cracked tiles and a shower head that sputtered water sporadically. As I stepped under the lukewarm water, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as though the shadows in the corners of the bathroom were moving, shifting ever so slightly. I quickly finished my shower and stepped out, wrapping a towel around myself. I tried to push the eerie feeling from my mind as I got dressed and climbed into bed. The rain outside had intensified, the drumming on the roof like a steady heartbeat. I pulled the scratchy motel blanket up to my chin and tried to relax, but sleep eluded me. Every creak of the floorboards in the corridor, every distant sound from the office, seemed amplified in the silence of the night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of the strange motel and its even stranger inhabitants. Suddenly I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, my eyes fixed on the glass. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling as I reached for the curtain. When I finally pulled the curtain aside, I gasped in horror. A figure stood outside, obscured by the rain-smeared glass. It was a man, his face hidden beneath a hooded raincoat, but I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. A knife. I stumbled back in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure continued to tap on the window, his eyes locked on mine. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911, but as I brought the phone to my ear, I realized there was no dial tone, only static. The figure outside the window began to speak, his voice muffled by the glass but filled with an unsettling calmness. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his words sending a chill down my spine. "This place, it's not what it seems." I backed away from the window, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Who was this man, and what did he mean? I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help me defend myself. The room was bare, with no weapons in sight. As I turned back to the window, the figure had disappeared. I hesitated for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, before I mustered the courage to approach the window once more. I cautiously peered outside, but the man was gone, leaving no trace of his presence. I locked the window and pulled the curtains closed, my heart still pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, but the rain outside showed no signs of letting up. I had no choice but to wait until morning. I spent the rest of the night in a state of heightened anxiety, my senses on high alert. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards seemed like a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister lurked in the shadows of the motel. When morning finally came, I wasted no time packing my things and checking out of the motel. The clerk at the front desk seemed as disinterested as ever, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the terrifying encounter I had endured. As I drove away from the motel, I couldn't help but wonder about the strange events of the night. Who was the mysterious figure outside my window, and what did he mean by, "This place is not what it seems"? I knew I would never have answers to those questions, but I also knew that I never wanted to set foot in that motel again. The rain had finally stopped, and the sun had broken through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the countryside. I took a deep breath, relieved to be leaving that nightmarish place behind. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw a faint figure standing in the doorway of room 13, watching me leave with hollow, empty eyes. I sped away, putting as much distance between myself and that motel as possible. The memory of that night would haunt me for the rest of my days, a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest things are not the ones that go bump in the night, but the ones that lurk in the darkest corners of our own minds. I had been driving for hours, the monotonous hum of the engine and the endless stretch of highway threatening to lull me to sleep. It was well past midnight when I spotted the neon sign on the side of the road. The Lone Star Motel, vacancy. Relief washed over me as I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunching sound beneath my tires signaling the end of my long journey. The motel was a single-story building with a row of doors facing the parking lot, each illuminated by a flickering overhead light. It wasn't much to look at, but it was exactly what I needed, a place to rest for the night. I parked my car and stepped out, stretching my tired limbs. The night air was cool and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees that surrounded the motel. I made my way to the office, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the stillness of the night. The office was small and dimly lit, the counter separating me from a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a worn-out expression. He glanced up from his newspaper as I entered, offering me a half-hearted smile. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice lacking any enthusiasm. "I need a room for the night," I replied, equally unenthusiastic after hours of driving. He nodded as if expecting nothing more. "How many nights?" "Just one," I said, relieved to be spending only a single night at this dreary place. He pushed a weathered guest book toward me and I scribbled my name and contact information. He handed me a key with a plastic fob that read room 7 inches and pointed to a small map of the motel. "Your room is at the end of the building on the left," he said, his tone never wavering. I handed him some cash and he counted it meticulously before handing me a receipt. "That'll be $50, he said, as if the amount was etched in stone. I took the key and thanked him, then made my way to room 7. The motel was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hooting of an owl in the distance. The door to my room was worn and faded, the paint peeling in places. I inserted the key and turned the handle, the door creaking open to reveal a dimly lit interior. The room was simple, with a double bed covered in faded floral sheets, a nightstand, and a rickety old chair in the corner. The overhead light flickered ominously, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I switched on the bedside lamp, illuminating the room in a soft yellow glow. As I settled into bed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The room had an odd, almost oppressive atmosphere, as if it held secrets of its own. The air was heavy, as though it hadn't been refreshed in years. I tried to shake off the feeling and closed my eyes, but sleep was slow to come. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from the office seemed magnified in the stillness of the night. It was as if the motel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and I was still awake, my mind racing with thoughts of the long road ahead. That's when I heard it, a soft, whispering voice. It was faint at first, like a distant murmur carried on the wind. I strained to listen, trying to make out the words. The voice grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was coming from the room next door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, panicked. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and pressed my ear to the wall. "Please, no," a woman's voice pleaded, followed by the sound of muffled sobs. My blood ran cold, and I reached for my phone, ready to call 911. But just as I was about to dial, the voice stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the motel's aging air conditioning unit. I hesitated, torn between my instincts to help and a growing sense of dread. What if it had all been in my head? What if I was overreacting? I lay back down, trying to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, a trick of my tired mind. But sleep remained elusive, and the minutes ticked by slowly. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to know if the woman next door was all right. I got out of bed and approached the connecting door between our rooms. I listened carefully, but there was no sound, no movement from the other side. Gathering my courage, I knocked softly. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out once more, but still there was nothing. With my heart in my throat, I turned the doorknob slowly, my palms sweaty. The door swung open to reveal an empty, dimly lit room. The bed was neatly made, and there was no sign of the woman I had heard. It was as if she had never been there. I stepped into the room, my heart still racing, and checked the bathroom, the closet, and even under the bed. But there was no one. It was impossible, I thought. I had heard her cries, her pleas for help, as clear as day. I returned to my own room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Had it all been a hallucination, a trick played by my sleep-deprived mind? I couldn't make sense of it, but one thing was clear. I needed to get out of that motel as soon as possible. I hastily packed my things and went to the office to check out. The same clerk was there, his expression unchanged. I tried to explain what I had heard, but he only shrugged. "People come and go all the time," he said, as if dismissing my concerns. Maybe she checked out early. I left the motel in a hurry, my heart heavy with unease. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with that place, something hidden beneath its nondescript exterior. I continued my journey, putting miles between myself and the Lone Star Motel. The day passed in a blur, and as night fell once again, I found myself in another town, another motel. This one was newer, cleaner, and more welcoming. I checked in without hesitation, determined to put the strange events of the previous night behind me. But as I settled into bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. The room was pristine, the air fresh, yet I couldn't shake the eerie sensation that I was not alone. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a face in the darkness, but there was nothing. I tried to dismiss my unease and closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep. But just as I was on the brink of slumber, I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice, the same urgent, panic tone. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. It was coming from the room next door, just like before. This time, I wasted no time. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. The police arrived quickly, and I led them to the room next door. The door was locked, and they had to force it open. Inside, they found a woman, disheveled and terrified. She had been held against her will, the victim of a deranged man who had been stalking her for months. As they arrested the man and led him away in handcuffs, the woman thanked me, tears in her eyes. She had been sure that no one would hear her cries, that no one would come to her aid. She had almost given up hope. I couldn't help but think back to the Lone Star Motel, to the woman I had heard but had never seen. Had she been a victim too? Had I missed my chance to help her? I never found out the answer, but one thing was certain. The events of that night had changed me forever. I couldn't erase the memory of those whispered pleas for help, the feeling of unease that had followed me from that motel. As I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder about the darkness that could hide behind the most ordinary facades, the secrets that could be buried beneath the surface. The world was a vast and unpredictable place, and I had learned that even in the most unlikely of places, heroes could emerge, and villains could be unmasked. I drove on, my headlights cutting through the darkness, my mind forever haunted by the night I had spent at the Lone Star Motel, a place where the line between reality and the unknown had blurred, and where the true nature of fear had been revealed. It was a bleak and stormy night when I found myself driving down a desolate stretch of highway, the windshield wipers struggling to keep pace with the relentless rain. The gloomy landscape outside offered no solace, and I knew I had to find shelter soon. That's when I saw the neon sign flickering weakly in the downpour, like a lighthouse beckoning a lost sailor. The Midnight Haven Motel, it read. The sign was old and worn, but it promised warmth and a respite from the raging storm. With a sense of relief, I pulled into the gravel lot and parked my car under the dimly lit canopy. As I stepped out of my vehicle, I was immediately greeted by the harsh wind and rain, which seemed to intensify in this desolate part of the country. I hurried to the office, my soaked clothes clinging to my body, my shoes squishing with every step. The motel office was a small, dimly lit room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and old wood. Behind the counter sat a middle-aged man with a gruff demeanor. He barely looked up from his newspaper when I entered, acknowledging me with a simple nod. "Need a room?" he grumbled as if I were inconveniencing him. "Yes, please," I replied, my voice quivering from the cold. "How many nights?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the sports section of his newspaper. "Just one," I answered, eager to be on my way in the morning. He handed me a tarnished key with a plastic fob that read Room 9. "That'll be $50, he said without a hint of a smile. I handed him the cash and he counted it meticulously, as if suspecting me of trying to cheat him out of a few dollars. Finally, he handed me a receipt and I took the key and headed out into the storm once more. Room 9 was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The hallway was narrow and lined with peeling wallpaper, the carpet underfoot damp and musty. The place had clearly seen better days. I fumbled with the key in the lock, and when I finally entered the room, I was greeted by a stark and dimly lit space. The room was small, containing only the essentials: a lumpy double bed with faded sheets, a rickety nightstand with a flickering lamp, and a small dusty television mounted on the wall. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the walls seemed to close in around me. I quickly stripped off my wet clothes and turned on the lukewarm shower. The bathroom was equally unimpressive, with cracked tiles and a showerhead that sputtered water intermittently. As I stood under the tepid stream, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an irrational fear, I told myself, a product of my exhaustion and the eerie atmosphere of the motel. After the shower, I dried off and dressed in the spare clean clothes I had packed. I climbed into bed, hoping to find solace in sleep, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The rain outside showed no signs of letting up, and the incessant tapping on the window pane only added to my discomfort. I tried to shake off my unease and closed my eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Every creak of the floorboards in the corridor, every distant sound from the office, seemed magnified in the stillness of the night. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a restless spirit. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it. A soft, eerie whispering. It was barely audible at first, like a faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I strained to listen, trying to make out the words, but they were just beyond my grasp. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was coming from the room next door. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded panicked, her words tumbling out in a desperate stream. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. "Please, you have to let me go," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. I strained to hear more, but the words became unintelligible, as if she were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It was as though she were caught in the grip of some terrible nightmare. Fear gripped me, and I considered calling the police, but I had no way of knowing if the woman next door was in real danger or if she was suffering from some kind of delusion. I sat in my room, paralyzed by uncertainty as the woman's pleas grew louder and more frantic. The minutes stretched on, and I couldn't take it any longer. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the operator. She assured me that help was on the way and urged me to stay in my room. I waited anxiously, the minutes feeling like hours, until I heard the sound of sirens approaching. The police arrived quickly, and I led them to the room next door, my heart pounding with dread. The officers knocked on the door, identifying themselves, but there was no response from inside. With a sense of urgency, they forced the door open, and I watched as they entered the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I could see nothing from my vantage point in the hallway, but I strained to listen, hoping to hear some sign that the woman was safe. Then there was a scream, a bone-chilling, blood-curdling scream that sent shivers down my spine. It was followed by the sound of a struggle, of furniture being overturned, of desperate cries for help. I wanted to rush into the room to assist the officers, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. The struggle seemed to go on forever, the woman's screams echoing through the corridor until finally there was silence, a silence that was even more unsettling than the chaos that had preceded it. The officers emerged from the room, their faces pale and grim. They told me that the woman had been alone in the room, her frantic screams and pleas for help seemingly directed at an invisible assailant. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. I was left in a state of shock and confusion. Had I imagined the woman's cries for help, or had she been the victim of some unseen supernatural force? The officers assured me that she was now in their care and would receive the help she needed. But the mystery of what had transpired in that room haunted me. I couldn't stay at the Midnight Haven Motel any longer. The sense of unease and dread that hung in the air was suffocating, and I longed to put the unsettling events of the night behind me. I checked out of the motel early the next morning, and as I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the flickering neon sign. The storm had passed, and the motel looked almost peaceful in the pale light of dawn, but I knew that appearances could be deceiving, that darkness could lurk beneath even the most ordinary of facades. As I continued my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something beyond explanation, something that defied reason and logic. The memory of that night would stay with me, a chilling reminder that the line between reality and the unknown is thinner than we dare to imagine, and that the scariest things can often be found in the most unexpected places.